The clatter of plates and the hiss of the espresso machine filled the air like background music in a restless symphony. The Brooks Enterprises Cafe was alive with its usual chorus of orders, footsteps, and the steady hum of corporate ambition. Emma Warren balanced 3 plates along her arm, her practiced movements hiding the fatigue that pressed into her bones after 6 relentless hours on her feet. She pushed through the crowd of suits and laptops with the grace of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation meant spilled drinks and docked pay. 5 years ago, she had stood on a very different stage. A Georgetown graduate, honors in international relations, fluent in 4 languages, she had been marked for a future of diplomacy, negotiations, and international corridors of power, but life had shifted. Life had taken the shape of the small figure now tucked into the corner of the cafe, hidden behind a tall potted plant. 7-year-old Lily sat cross-legged with a battered German storybook, her golden hair falling across, her eyes as she mouthed the words silently, as if whispering secrets only she and the page could understand. Emma's heart softened each time she passed and caught sight of her daughter's concentrated face. She knelt briefly, brushing back Lily's hair and straightening the collar of her hand-me-down dress. 2 more hours, sweetheart, she murmured, forcing brightness into her voice. Are you hungry? I'll sneak you a muffin. Lily's lips curved into a mischievous smile, revealing the gap where her front tooth had been. Nein, danke, she replied in perfect German, her small voice filled with quiet pride. I'm saving room for our special dinner. Emma felt her chest tighten. Pasta with a sprinkle of cheese. That was all she had in the fridge until payday, but Lily's blue eyes glowed as if it were a feast fit for royalty. Your pronunciation is getting better every day, Emma whispered, smoothing a stray strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. Professor Miller says I speak better than the 4th graders, Lily said matter-of-factly, referring to their elderly German neighbor who often gave her lessons. Emma smiled, though exhaustion pulled at the corners of her mouth. Soon, you'll be teaching me, a sharp voice cut through their moment. Emma, table 12, the manager barked, snapping her back to the rhythm of trays and orders. She squeezed Lily's hand once. Remember, stay quiet. Practice your reading. The cafe was at its loudest now, the August heat driving more employees inside for iced coffees and quick lunches. Emma maneuvered between crowded tables, weaving through a tide of ambition dressed in gray suits. She didn't notice the tall figure that had just entered the cafe, the subtle hush of recognition that rippled through the staff at the sight of him. Nathan Brooks, the man whose name was carved into the glass doors of the skyscraper above them, strode in with the calm authority of someone who measured every glance, every pause, in terms of profit and loss. Behind the counter, the phone began to ring, shrill, insistent, ignored. The staff were too busy juggling orders. 1 ring, 2, 3. Emma was in the elevator, delivering trays to the executive floor. The manager was in the storage room. No one moved. The phone kept pleading, louder with each chime until it seemed the entire cafe pulsed with its demand. 7-year-old Lily's eyes darted to the counter. Her mother had told her to stay quiet, to remain invisible, but the sound was unbearable. She bit her lip, slid from her chair, and tiptoed to the counter. Standing on her toes, she stretched her small hand toward the receiver, finally gripping it and pulling it close. Brooks Enterprises Cafe, she said automatically, then added, Guten Tag. There was a silence, then a surprised male voice answered in fluent German. Guten Tag. This is Marcus Hoffman from Miller GmbH in Berlin. I need to confirm details with Mr. Brooks's office. Lily straightened her back as if the weight of her mother's dignity rested on her small shoulders. Die Führungskräfte sind in einer Besprechung, she replied, her tone careful, polite, professional beyond her years. May I take a message? Her free hand darted to the notepad beside the register. She scribbled furiously, muttering, in German as she wrote, Section 4.3, Manufacturing Specifications Concerns Noted. Her small handwriting was neat and deliberate. Unnoticed by her, Nathan Brooks had paused mid-step, his coffee halfway to his lips. His sharp gaze followed the child at the counter, his expression hardening. then shifting into something unreadable as he caught the cadence of her flawless German. The man on the other end spoke again. "Please ensure Mr. Brooks receives this message immediately." "Natürlich," Lily answered crisply. "Danke, auf Wiederhören." She hung up the phone, the notepad trembling slightly in her hand. A shadow fell over her. Slowly, Lily turned. Her bright blue eyes met the piercing stare of Nathan Brooks himself, the man whose empire stretched higher than the building above them. His presence towered, both intimidating and magnetic, his voice deep when he finally spoke. "And who," he asked, holding her gaze with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity, "might you be?" Lily clutched the notepad to her chest. Her voice was small but steady. "I'm Lily Warren, sir. My mom works here. The phone kept ringing and no one was answering, so I did." The cafe fell into a hush, though no one else understood why. In that moment, the lives of Emma and her daughter shifted quietly. The weight of their struggles balanced against the curiosity of a man who saw opportunity everywhere he looked, and Nathan Brooks had just discovered it in the most unlikely corner of his own cafe. The cream-colored envelope sat on the kitchen table like a sealed verdict. Emma Warren stared at it as though the paper itself had weight, pressing against her chest even from across the room. Her hands trembled each time she reached for it, as if opening it would make her worst fears real. She had carried it home from the cafe the night before, tucked into her apron like contraband. The Brooks Enterprises logo at the top glared up at her in embossed silver. No explanation, no pleasantries. Just 12 words typed in neat, merciless font. "Please report to Mr. Brooks's office at 9 a.m. Sharp." Emma hadn't slept. She had paced their tiny Bronx apartment while Lily dozed peacefully in the corner bed they shared. Every possibility unraveled in her mind. Termination for breaking rules, humiliation for bringing her daughter to work, blacklisting from even the lowliest cafe jobs in the city. If she lost this position, they would sink. Rent was already late. Bills piled like enemies at the door. By dawn, Emma had ironed her best blouse, the only one without visible mending, and smoothed her hair into a neat bun. Lily, sensing the gravity of the day, had dressed in her simple cotton dress without protest, her blue eyes wide with questions she didn't voice until they stood waiting for the elevator in the glittering lobby of Brooks Enterprises. "Moody," Lily whispered, using the German endearment she'd adopted from their neighbor. "Is this because of the phone call?" Emma knelt, straightening the bow at the back of her daughter's dress. Her voice was steady, though her stomach churned. "Yes. But remember, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. You helped. If anyone is in trouble, it's me." "But who would have answered if I wasn't there?" Lily asked, her childlike logic sharp enough to pierce Emma's fear. Emma forced a smile. "That's a good point. Let's see if Mr. Brooks agrees." The elevator ride stretched endlessly, polished doors reflecting a woman Emma hardly recognized, a waitress trying desperately to look like the professional she once had been. Her heart thudded louder with each floor climbed, until at last the doors opened to the executive suite. It was another world. Plush carpeting muffled every step, walnut paneling gleamed under golden lights, and hushed voices whispered of power. A receptionist with flawless makeup eyed Emma and Lily with thinly veiled curiosity before directing them toward the imposing double doors at the end of the corridor. A young assistant appeared, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Brooks will see you now." Emma's breath caught. She smoothed her blouse once more, whispered, "Let me do the talking," to Lily, and stepped into the lion's den. Nathan Brooks stood silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The morning sun gilded the skyline, framing him like a portrait of authority itself. He turned as they entered, his gaze sharp, measuring, unreadable. "Ms. Warren," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "Please sit." Emma, perched on the edge of the leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lily climbed onto the chair beside her, her feet swinging above the floor. "Mr. Brooks, about yesterday," Emma began, her voice catching, but he lifted a hand to silence her. "These are remarkable," he interrupted, sliding a notepad across the desk. Emma froze. It was Lily's notes from the phone call, written neatly in a child's hand, half in German, half in English. My daughter was only... Your daughter, Nathan cut in, captured details my international team missed. In 3 separate calls with Muller GmbH, his piercing gaze shifted from Lily back to Emma. Tell me, Ms. Warren, why is a Georgetown graduate with honors in international relations serving coffee in my company cafe? The question hit like a blow. Emma's heart slammed against her. Ribs, how did you... I had HR pull your file, Nathan explained, his tone cool but curious. Fluent in 4 languages, finalist in an international interpretation competition, glowing recommendations from Professor Hargrove, who, incidentally, is an old friend of mine, and yet... He gestured to her worn blouse and trembling hands. Here you are. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. Life took an unexpected turn. Her eyes flicked briefly to Lily, who sat stiff and silent beside her. Understanding flickered in Nathan's gaze. I see. I've applied to over 200 positions in my field. Emma continued, desperation spilling through the cracks. But I was a new mother with no experience. No one would take the risk. Their loss, Nathan said abruptly. He stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the desk. With deliberate movements, he pulled a folder from the side table and placed it before her. Muller GmbH is our most critical European partner. We need someone with your exact skills for the next 3 months of negotiations. Someone who understands not just the language but the culture. Emma blinked, unable to process the words. This is a temporary contract, Nathan continued. 3 months with possibility for permanent placement. Salary 4 times your current wage. Benefits included. And perhaps most importantly, his eyes flicked to Lily. Flexibility for your family obligations. Emma's breath caught. Mr. Brooks, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lily whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Emma looked at the contract spread across the desk, the embossed logo shining under the morning sun. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, torn between terror and hope. Nathan, Brooks, the man who saw profit and loss in everything, watched her with cool intensity. But beneath the steel in his eyes lingered something else. Curiosity, maybe even recognition. Emma realized, in that moment, that her life was about to change. The question was whether she had the courage to let it. Emma had never felt so small. The boardroom stretched like an arena, polished wood gleaming beneath the harsh white light, walls lined with framed photographs of Brooks Enterprises milestones. The long glass table reflected the faces of executives, their tailored suits and expensive watches gleaming like armor. Conversations hummed in clipped tones, men and women tossing acronyms back and forth like weapons. Emma stood just inside the door, clutching a leather portfolio she had bought at a thrift store that still carried the faint scent of mothballs. Her palms were damp, her heart thudded in her ears so loud she feared the executives might hear it. Ms. Warren. Nathan Brooks's voice sliced through the chatter. Instantly the room quieted. He was already seated at the head of the table, a presence that radiated both authority and impatience. His gaze locked on Emma, unreadable as ever. He gestured toward the chair to his right. Please. Emma forced, her legs to move, every step echoing louder than the last. She sat, her back stiff, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. This is Emma Warren, Nathan announced, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made the executives lean forward, with interest. She will be serving as our lead interpreter for the Muller negotiations. Murmurs rippled around the table. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. A woman across from her tilted her head, her perfect blonde hair catching the light. Rebecca Stevens. Emma had seen her once in the cafe, elegant even with a to-go coffee cup in hand. Now, across the boardroom table, Rebecca's cool gray eyes raked over Emma with clinical precision. A waitress, Rebecca said, her smile sharp. Interesting choice. Emma's stomach nodded, but Nathan's tone cut the air before she could speak. A Georgetown graduate, fluent in 4 languages, more qualified than anyone else in this room to bridge the gap with Muller GmbH. Rebecca's smile didn't falter, but her gaze narrowed. Emma knew instantly she had made an enemy. The meeting began. Pages of documents slid across the table, filled with dense technical jargon Emma had never seen before. Semiconductor specifications, licensing clauses, intellectual property protections, words blurred together like a language she didn't know, though the German translation sat beneath them in crisp font. "Ms. Warren," Nathan's voice jolted her. "Would you walk us through Section 2.4? Emma's throat went dry. She glanced at the page. The German text bristled with industrial vocabulary she had never studied. Drahtbandverfahren, Substratbeschichtung, words that belonged to engineers, not interpreters. Her pulse quickened. The room seemed to close in on her, the executive's expectant eyes burning holes in her composure. Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to begin. Section 2.4 outlines concerns regarding substrate layering and wire bonding procedures. Her translation faltered, halting, uncertain. Rebecca's smirk deepened. Emma's chest tightened. She couldn't do this. She was out of her depth. 5 years serving coffee had eroded the sharpness of her once brilliant mind. She imagined the call to HR, the polite dismissal, the return to the cafe in shame. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw the silver reflection of a notepad, Lily's notepad, tucked into her bag at her feet, neat handwriting. Section 4.3, Manufacturing Specifications. The memory of her daughter's small voice replayed. "Moody, you always say we don't know what we can do until we try." Her breath steadied. She straightened in her chair. Switching fully into German, Emma read the paragraph aloud, her tongue wrapping around the technical words, carefully enunciating. Then she translated again, slower, into English, drawing connections between the German phrasing and the broader meaning. As she spoke, she sketched rough diagrams in her notebook, visualizing the processes as she remembered her university mnemonic techniques. The executives leaned in. For the first time, she saw surprise flicker across their faces. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, Nathan nodded once. "Accurate. Proceed." Relief flooded her chest, but it lasted only a moment. Rebecca's voice rang out, sweet as poison. "Well done, for a waitress, but let's see how she handles real-time negotiation." The screen at the far end of the room flickered to life, connecting them to the Mueller GmbH delegation in Berlin. German voices filled the room, rapid fire, overlapping, thick with regional inflections. Emma's pulse raced again. This was no textbook exercise. This was combat. One of the Germans, a stern man with rimless glasses, launched into a barrage of terms about licensing fees, throwing in idiomatic expressions that twisted their meaning. Emma's brain scrambled to keep up. She translated, stumbled, corrected herself, then pushed forward. Each sentence was a knife's edge. Each word, a test of balance. The executives watched her like hawks. Rebecca leaned back, her smile daring Emma to falter. And then, midstream, Emma caught the rhythm. The words became music, each phrase a chord she knew instinctively how to resolve. She moved between German and English like a bridge spanning a dangerous river, her voice steady, confident. By the end of the call, the Germans were nodding, their tone respectful. One even cracked a smile, rare in such early negotiations. When the screen went dark, David Chen, a junior analyst, whispered, "They actually smiled. That never happens." Emma exhaled, her body trembling from the effort. She expected Nathan to offer a curt nod, nothing more. Instead, he said quietly, "Well done, Ms. Warren." And though his face remained impassive, his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary, as if seeing not just an interpreter, but something more. Rebecca caught the glance. Her jaw tightened. As the meeting adjourned, Emma gathered her papers with shaking hands. She had survived, barely, but survival wasn't enough. She sensed it clearly now. She was standing at the edge of a battlefield, one where language wasn't the only weapon. When she left the boardroom, she didn't see the elegant figure lingering in the hallway shadows. Rebecca Stevens watched Emma's retreating form, her smile gone, her expression cold. Emma Warren might have won today, but Rebecca would make sure she didn't win tomorrow. Rain had been threatening Manhattan all afternoon, heavy clouds gathering like an army massing at the horizon. By evening, the storm broke, thunder cracking against the skyscrapers, sheets of rain hammering the glass walls of Brooks Enterprises. The lights flickered once, then steadied, casting sharp white reflections across the polished boardroom table. Emma Warren sat with her notebook open, translating a barrage of German legal terms volleyed through the video call. The Mueller GmbH lawyer spoke quickly, their clipped accents sharpened by irritation. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night, and the negotiations still dragged on. The storm outside roared like a reminder of everything Emma could not control. Her head throbbed. She had been on edge since the afternoon when Lily's caretaker had called. The little girl had complained of being tired, but the center's nurse said it was nothing serious. Now, with every gust of wind rattling the glass, Emma's nerves frayed thinner. "Tell them we'll consider their proposal," Nathan said from the head of the table, his voice measured, "but stress that any amendments must be mutually beneficial." Emma repeated his words in German, firm, steady, even as her stomach twisted with worry. When the call ended, the executives scattered quickly, eager to escape the storm. Only Nathan remained, his sharp gaze still on the contract papers, his tie loosened, fatigue barely touching his controlled presence. Emma gathered her things, her phone buzzing on the table. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Frowning, she answered. "Ms. Warren? This is Jennifer from childcare." Emma's body went rigid. "Is Lily all right?" "She developed a fever an hour ago," Jennifer explained quickly. "Nothing serious, just a virus, but our protocol requires she be picked up immediately. We've kept her in the medical office, with fluids." Emma's chest constricted. "I'll be right there." She ended the call, already shoving her papers into her bag. "Problem?" Nathan's voice cut through, calm but edged with curiosity. "My daughter." Emma tried to steady her voice. "She's sick. I need to get to her." Before Nathan could respond, another voice rose from the doorway. Rebecca Stevens, immaculate, as ever despite the storm, leaned against the frame, her smirk cool and poisonous. "How inconvenient," she said smoothly. "Mueller's team is sending their final list of questions tonight. Someone will need to draft responses by morning." Her eyes flicked to Emma's rumpled blouse, the fatigue lining her face. "Some of us learned long ago that family distractions can destroy a career." Emma froze, fury and humiliation burning in equal measure. "I'll work from home. I can manage both." Rebecca's laugh was soft, cruel. "Without access to the confidential database? I don't think so. Perhaps Mr. Brooks will finally realize this experiment of his is..." "Enough," Nathan's voice cut like a blade. He rose slowly, his full height commanding the room. His eyes pinned Rebecca, in place hard as flint. "Draft the responses yourself, Rebecca. Ms. Warren has more important priorities tonight." Rebecca's lips parted, shocked. She recovered quickly, masking it with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Of course, sir." With a pointed glance at Emma, she swept away, her heels clicking like warning shots. Emma's hands shook as she clutched her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I'll go," he interrupted, his tone firm, leaving no room for argument. "I'll have the files delivered to you." The storm followed Emma into the elevator, its howling wind and pounding rain pressing against the glass walls as the car descended. By the time she reached the medical suite, her blouse was damp with sweat despite the cold air. Lily lay curled on a small cot, cheeks flushed pink, her eyes glassy with fever. Emma rushed to her, kneeling, to stroke her damp hair. Relief flooded her as Lily stirred, murmuring, "Moody?" "I'm here, sweetheart," Emma whispered, gathering her into her arms. "Just a fever, you'll be better soon." The nurse handed her instructions, but Emma hardly heard. All she wanted was to get Lily home. But when she opened her rideshare app, her stomach dropped. The storm had paralyzed the city. No cars available, subways flooding, buses delayed for hours. She was stranded. The door to the suite opened. Emma looked up in disbelief. Nathan Brooks stood there, raindrops glistening on his shoulders, his tailored suit damp at the edges. His presence filled the small room, commanding, yet strangely gentle. "How is she?" he asked, his deep voice softened. "Just a fever," Emma managed, confusion and gratitude tangling her words. "The doctor says she'll be fine." "Good." Nathan nodded once, then looked directly at Emma. "My driver is waiting downstairs. The streets are chaos and you won't find a cab tonight." Emma blinked. "That's really not necessary?" His mouth quirked faintly, not quite a smile. "You're stranded in a storm with a sick child. Get your things, I'll take you." Emma hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But Lily shifted weakly in her arms, her small body radiating heat. She nodded once. "Thank you." Minutes later, she sat in the back of Nathan's luxury sedan, the leather seats soft beneath her trembling form. Lily rested against her shoulder, already dozing. Rain hammered the roof, drowning the city in shadow. For a long time, the only sound was the storm. Then Nathan spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "My mother raised 3 of us alone," he said, his eyes on the rain-slicked streets outside. "She came from Germany with nothing but determination. My father left shortly after." Emma turned, startled by the rawness in his tone. "When I was 8, he continued, my brother caught pneumonia in a blizzard. We had no car, no money for a doctor. An elderly neighbor, a man my mother had once helped with translations, walked 3 miles through the snow to fetch one. Saved his life." His voice softened further. "She never forgot that kindness. She taught us that true success isn't measured by what you achieve, but by how you treat others when it matters." Emma stared at him, caught off guard by the glimpse of pain beneath his polished exterior. The ruthless CEO, the man who seemed carved from stone, carried scars of his own. As the car pulled up to her apartment building, Nathan finally looked at her. His gaze lingered, searching as though weighing something unspoken. "My mother," he said quietly, "would have liked you." Emma's breath caught. The storm still raged outside, but in that moment the world seemed strangely still. She carried Lily inside, her heart pounding with more than fear now. Something had shifted, something she did not yet dare to name. Berlin was drenched in early morning mist when Emma Warren pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass of the hotel window. Below, the streets wound like veins through the historic city, trams clattering past Gothic facades that whispered of centuries of history. She had walked these very streets as a carefree exchange student 7 years ago, before everything changed. Before Lily. Before the weight of single motherhood. Now she returned not as a student but as Brooks Enterprises' newest interpreter, entrusted with negotiations that could shift the company's European future. And yet inside her, a war raged. "I don't belong here. I'm an imposter in a borrowed suit." A knock startled her. David Chen, the junior analyst, peeked in with his usual nervous smile. "Conference starts in 20. Nathan wants you in early. Big day." Emma nodded, straightening the charcoal suit she had ironed to perfection. Her fingers brushed the brooch Nathan had given her before the trip, his late mother's silver note with the tiny sapphire. She wore it pinned to her lapel now, a talisman against the tide of doubt. The conference hall reeked of old-world grandeur, heavy chandeliers, walnut paneling, draperies that seemed too heavy for their rods. The Brooks Enterprises team arranged themselves around the table, folders stacked high, laptops glowing faintly in the dim light. Emma's heart steadied as she reminded herself, this is just language. Words. I know words. The double doors opened. The Muller GmbH delegation entered, their polished shoes clicking on marble. At the head strode a tall man with sharp shoulders and eyes so piercingly blue that Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew those eyes. She had seen them every day for 7 years, reflected in Lily's small, eager face. Thomas Bauer. TT. Air seemed to vanish from the room. Emma's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself upright. She couldn't let it show. Not here, not now. Nathan rose smoothly. Herr Bauer, he greeted. Welcome. I'm Nathan Brooks, CEO. Thomas's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. But when his eyes flicked to Emma, the practiced mask cracked for just a fraction of a second. Confusion, then recognition, then something darker. Discomfort. Nathan gestured to his team. And this is Emma Warren, our Director of International Relations and lead interpreter. Emma's throat tightened, but she extended her hand. Thomas hesitated, then clasped it briefly, his palm clammy. Frau Warren, he said in German, his tone cold, clipped. What a surprise. Her pulse thundered, but her voice came steady. Herr Bauer, it has been a long time. Nathan's eyes darted between them, reading something beneath the surface, but he said nothing. The negotiations began. Thomas launched into rapid-fire German, his accent deliberate, calculated. He peppered his sentences with obscure regional phrases Emma hadn't heard since her university days, archaic business idioms meant to confuse. Emma translated smoothly, her tone calm, her mind racing. Why is he doing this? Is it to unsettle me, or to sabotage the deal? Nathan's brow furrowed as he leaned toward her, his whisper low. What's going on? He's deliberately complicating this. Emma forced her breath steady. He's testing us. Hour after hour, the two sides sparred across the table, Emma the bridge that carried meaning back and forth. She caught every nuance, every buried implication, translating not only words but cultural rhythms. When Thomas tried to corner Brooks Enterprises with a veiled threat about licensing control, Emma slipped in a counter, reframing his idiom so it landed harmlessly. But under her professional calm, her heart raged. Every glance from Thomas was a blade, every smile a threat. He was the man who had disappeared the moment she told him about Lily, who had blocked her calls, erased her from his life, and now dared to sit across from her as if she were nothing. At lunch, Nathan pulled her aside. You seem tense. His voice was quiet, but his eyes sharp. I'm fine, she said too quickly. You're not, he replied. And I need to know why. Emma met his gaze, the weight of truth pressing against her chest. But fear chained her tongue. If he finds out, will he fire me? Will he see me as compromised? I'm just tired, she lied. The jet lag. Nathan studied her a moment longer, then nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. The afternoon session grew uglier. Thomas's words sharpened into weapons, his tone impatient, condescending. Emma kept pace, though sweat dampened her back. By the end of the day, the Germans had agreed to a tentative framework, a small victory Nathan acknowledged with a nod. But as the room emptied, Thomas lingered. A word, Frau Warren, he said quietly. His tone was polite, but his eyes burned with something else. Emma's stomach churned. She glanced at Nathan, but he was distracted by a cluster of German lawyers. Reluctantly, she followed Thomas into a quiet corner. The mask dropped. His smile vanished, replaced by a sneer. What game are you playing, Emma? His voice was low, dangerous. Her pulse spiked. I had no idea you worked for Muller GmbH. I didn't even know if you were still in Germany. Convenient, he hissed. You never mentioned working for Brooks Enterprises. I only joined 3 months ago. His eyes narrowed. Is this revenge? Using old connections to push through this deal? Revenge? Her voice rose, then she forced it down. You disappeared when I needed you most. You abandoned me, and... She stopped herself before the word Lily could escape. He leaned closer, his breath acrid. End this negotiation, Emma, or I'll make sure everyone knows about your work with Schaefer Industries. Industrial espionage is a serious charge in Germany. Emma's blood ran cold. That was a student translation job. It was legitimate. Perception is everything, Thomas said with a cruel smile. And I have the connections to twist it however I please. He stepped back, his expression once again smooth, professional. You have until tomorrow to decide. Help me derail this deal, or I destroy your career. He left her trembling, clutching the edge of the table for balance. When Nathan finally approached, concern etched in his face, Emma forced a brittle smile. I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed. But inside, panic screamed. Tomorrow, the negotiations would resume. Tomorrow she would face Thomas again, her past, her shame, her fear, with everything on the line. That night, alone in her hotel room, Emma paced, the clock ticking toward midnight. She stared at the brooch pinned to her lapel, at the reflection of her own exhausted face in the mirror. She thought of Lily asleep in New York, safe in Mrs. Rodriguez's care, unaware that her father sat half a world away threatening to tear everything down. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nathan, reviewing tomorrow's clauses. Could use your insight. My sweet. Midnight. Her hand trembled as she held the phone. Do I tell him the truth? Do I risk everything? Or do I carry this burden alone? Emma drew a shaky breath. She knew one thing. Silence would no longer protect her. She slipped on her blazer, the silver brooch gleaming faintly in the dim light, and stepped into the hallway. And for the first time since Berlin, she was ready to face not just the negotiations, but the truth. The hallway outside Nathan Brooks's suite was unnervingly quiet. Plush carpeting swallowed Emma's footsteps, but inside her chest her heart beat loud enough to echo. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, then let her knuckles brush the polished wood. For a moment there was no answer, only the sound of her own breathing. Then the door clicked open. Nathan stood there, tie loosened, the severe lines of his suit softened by the lateness of the hour. He looked almost human now, less CEO and more man, though his eyes, sharp, assessing, missed nothing. I saw the light under your door, he said simply, stepping back to let her in. I thought you might be reviewing the clauses too. Emma entered cautiously. His suite was spacious but understated. Dark oak furniture, a desk strewn with documents, the Berlin skyline glowing faintly through floor-to-ceiling windows. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city hushed under pale moonlight. Nathan poured a measure of scotch into a glass but didn't drink, just held it loosely, his gaze fixed on her. You've been off since the moment Bauer walked in? And don't tell me it's jet lag. What's going on? Emma's throat constricted. She had rehearsed lies all evening, excuses about fatigue, about the pace of negotiations. But in the stillness of his gaze, she knew deception would shatter. She sat at the edge of the armchair, hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. There's something you need to know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And it might ruin everything. Nathan set the glass down untouched. Then tell me, now. The silence stretched so long it ached. Finally, Emma drew a ragged breath. I knew Thomas Bauer, before, years ago, when I was in Berlin as an exchange student. Her voice cracked. We were involved. Nathan's expression didn't flicker, but his stillness was worse than anger. It was as if he had turned into stone, waiting for the blade to drop. When I found out I was pregnant, I told him, Emma continued, her eyes burning. He disappeared, blocked my calls, my emails. I never heard from him again, until today. The words spilled now, unstoppable. He cornered me after the session. He said if I don't help derail the negotiations, he'll tell the board I worked for Schaefer Industries. He'll twist it into espionage. She looked down, ashamed. It was just a 3-week student job, translating product manuals, nothing confidential. But he said perception is everything. When she dared lift her gaze, Nathan's eyes were on her, unreadable, piercing. Why didn't you tell me the moment you saw him? Because I was afraid. Her voice cracked. Afraid you'd see me as compromised. Afraid you'd fire me. This job is all I have. If I lose it, She broke off, thinking of Lily asleep across the ocean, her entire future balanced on Emma's fragile chance. Nathan rose slowly, pacing toward the window. His reflection glared back at him from the glass, sharp lines against the city's moonlit sprawl. The silence stretched, suffocating. Emma gripped the armchair, fighting tears. "If you want me to resign, I will. Tell the board I was a conflict of interest. Just don't let them drag Lily into this." At that name, Nathan turned sharply. His gaze locked on her, and for the first time his mask cracked. Anger flickered there, not at her, but at the situation, at the man who dared weaponize her child. "Bauer is bluffing," Nathan said at last, his voice like steel. "Our due diligence on this deal was exhaustive. If there had been a real conflict, it would have been flagged months ago." Emma blinked. "But he's using fear," Nathan interrupted. "Fear is leverage, and leverage only works if you let it." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room, his tone suddenly softer. "Did you ever share Brooks Enterprises information with him?" "No." Emma's answer was immediate, fierce. "I hadn't even heard of Brooks when I knew him. I've never spoken to him since." Nathan studied her face, weighing every word. Then, with startling finality, he nodded once. "Then we move forward, as planned." Emma exhaled, her body trembling with relief and disbelief. "You're not dismissing me?" Nathan's mouth curved faintly. Not a smile, but something harder. "That's exactly what Bauer wants. For you to break, for us to lose ground. I don't reward bad faith." He returned to his desk, picked up a folder and handed it to her. "In fact, I want you sharper tomorrow. He'll try again, but this time, we'll be ready." Emma took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were notes, not corporate reports, but a detailed breakdown of Bauer's professional history, compiled by Brooks's analysts. Expense reports, irregularities, patterns. "You investigated him?" she whispered. "Tonight," Nathan said flatly. "After you left. My financial team works quickly. Turns out Herr Bauer has been creative with his department's budget, enough to raise questions at headquarters." His eyes darkened. "By morning, those questions will be raised." Emma stared at the papers, her mind reeling. "You're turning his threat back on him." Nathan's voice was quiet, dangerous. "He wanted war. He'll regret it." For a long moment, Emma could only sit, the folder heavy in her lap. Relief mingled with unease. She had expected Nathan to dismiss her, to protect his empire at her expense. Instead, he had not only believed her, he had chosen to fight beside her. But at what cost? The ruthlessness in his eyes chilled her almost as much as it comforted. "Why?" she asked finally. Her voice was small, vulnerable. "Why fight for me when you could replace me with someone easier?" Nathan held her gaze. For once the polished mask fell, and in its place was something raw, unguarded. "Because you're not replaceable. Not to this deal, not to me." The words hung between them, charged with more than business. Emma's pulse quickened, though she forced herself to look away, focusing on the city lights instead of the man whose intensity threatened to undo her. The clock ticked toward 1 in the morning. Papers lay scattered across the desk, but the room felt hushed, the air thick with the weight of unspoken things. Finally, Nathan said quietly, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you'll show Bauer and the board exactly who you are." Emma rose, on unsteady legs, clutching the folder like armor. At the door, she paused, turning back. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan's jaw tightened as if the words unsettled him more than they should. He only nodded once. "Good night, Emma." She stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding. Behind her, the door clicked shut. The first time in years, Emma felt both terrified and hopeful. She had confessed everything. She had expected ruin. Instead, she had found an ally. But as she returned to her room, she knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the war with Thomas would escalate. Tomorrow, the world would test not only her skill, but her courage. And tomorrow, Emma Warren would no longer be able to hide in the shadows of her own life. The plane touched down at JFK in the gray hush of early morning. Emma sat stiffly, her head against the cool window, exhaustion weighing down every muscle. The negotiation sessions in Berlin had ended with victory, Muller's lawyers begrudgingly, yielding, Bauer recalled in disgrace. But there had been no celebration inside her. Only relief, tempered by a constant undercurrent of dread. She thought of Lily, waiting back in New York, her laughter and questions, her innocent belief that her mother could handle anything. Emma had carried herself through the week by clutching that image like a lifeline. Now she wanted nothing more than to scoop her daughter into her arms and collapse into the comfort of their small, imperfect apartment. But her phone buzzed as the plane taxied, and her heart sank. A message from Mrs. Rodriguez. Emergency. Pipe. First upstairs, apartment flooded, saved what I could. You and Lily can't stay here. Don't worry, she's safe with me. Attached was a photo, water cascading from her ceiling, soaking the threadbare sofa, the small kitchen table, Lily's schoolbooks floating like lost ships. Emma's throat closed. Years of scraping, saving, piecing together a fragile life, undone in a single night. By the time Nathan's black sedan pulled up outside the terminal, her hands were trembling. He stepped out, tall and composed despite his own sleepless journey, his dark suit immaculate. One glance at her stricken face, and his expression shifted, the steel softening into something else. What happened? He asked. Emma wordlessly held out the phone. His eyes flicked over the image, then hardened. You can't stay there. Not for weeks, maybe months. I'll find something, Emma said quickly, her voice brittle. A hotel, maybe. With what money? Nathan's tone was sharp, but not unkind. Insurance will take weeks. Extended stay hotels will eat half your salary in days. You need stability for Lily. Emma bristled, shame and pride colliding. We've managed before. We'll manage again. Nathan studied her for a long moment, then spoke with quiet finality. The Brooks residence has a guest apartment furnished. Separate entrance, you and Lily will stay there. Emma's breath caught. That's impossible. People will talk. Rebecca, people always talk, Nathan said, dismissive. And Rebecca talks loudest when she's losing ground. He opened the car door for her. Get in. This isn't charity, Ms. Warren. Consider it an executive accommodation. The company needs you functional. Emma wanted to protest, but fatigue and fear hollowed her strength. She slid into the car, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. 3 hours later, she stood in the east wing of Nathan's Upper East, side brownstone, her mouth dry as she surveyed what he had modestly called a guest apartment. It was no apartment. It was a sanctuary. Gleaming hardwood floors, tall windows spilling light across Persian rugs, furniture that looked as if it had been curated for a design magazine. A private garden stretched beyond French doors, green and serene. This was my mother's studio, Nathan explained quietly, his hand brushing the edge of a bookshelf filled with German classics. After she passed, I had it converted for guests, but no one's really used it. Lily bounded ahead, her small shoes squeaking against the polished floor. She flung herself onto a queen-sized bed in one of the bedrooms, her giggle ringing, like bells. Moody, it's like a hotel, but better. Emma's eyes stung. Her daughter's joy only deepened her own unease. They didn't belong here. Not among the polished wood and velvet drapes, not within walls that whispered of wealth and legacy. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her new bed, hugging the stuffed rabbit Mrs. Rodriguez had rescued from the flood, Emma wandered into the garden. Autumn air hung crisp and cool, the city muffled beyond the high walls. Nathan sat at a wrought iron table, nursing a glass of scotch, his sleeves rolled up, the weight of leadership stripped down to a man's weariness. She hesitated, then joined him. Thank you, she said softly. For everything, for handling Bauer, for this. He waved it off. The Muller deal was a team effort. And this. His gesture encompassed the apartment, the garden, the safety it represented. was necessary. Still, Emma said, her voice tight, I don't want you to think I'm relying on you. His eyes cut to hers, sharp even in the dim light. You think this is about obligation? Emma swallowed, her pulse quickening. I don't help people out of pity, Nathan continued, his voice lower, steadier. I help because I see value. And you, Emma, you're not just valuable to this company. You're something else. The words hung between them, unspoken and dangerous. Emma's heart thudded, her instinct screaming to retreat, to protect herself. Before she could reply, a faint sound drifted from the apartment, Lily shifting in her sleep. Nathan's gaze flicked toward the windows, then softened. She seems happy here, he said quietly. She adapts to everything, Emma whispered, her throat tight. Too much, maybe. Resilience, Nathan murmured, swirling his glass. The most powerful inheritance you can give a child. Emma looked at him, at the hard lines softened by moonlight, at the man who had intimidated her only weeks ago, but now sat across from her with the strange weight of trust. And for the first time, she wondered not what it would cost to lean on him, but what it might cost if she didn't. Inside, the city roared beyond the walls, but here, in this borrowed garden, silence stretched, filled with the unspoken tension of two people who had both built fortresses around themselves and were slowly, dangerously lowering the gates. The boardroom was colder than usual. Or maybe it was just Emma, her palms damp against the smooth leather folder she clutched as though it could shield her from the stares burning into her back. The mahogany table stretched like a battlefield, lined with men and women in tailored suits, their eyes sharp, restless, waiting. At the head sat Nathan Brooks, calm, unreadable, a presence that filled the space without raising his voice. Emma had faced pressure before, late rent, empty cupboards, hospital bills she couldn't pay. But this was different. This was a theater of power, and she was the one under the spotlight. Rebecca's entrance had been deliberate. She glided in late, a crimson silk blouse flashing like a warning flare, her hair immaculately coiled. She leaned to whisper something into the ear of the CFO, and a ripple of smirks followed down the line. Emma caught fragments of words. Inappropriate. Residing. Favoritism. Her stomach twisted. She knew what Rebecca had done. The whispers weren't just whispers anymore. Rebecca had taken Emma's stay in Nathan's guest wing and weaponized it, spinning it into a narrative of scandal. A poor single mother, suddenly promoted, suddenly indispensable, suddenly living under the same roof as the CEO. Shall we begin? Nathan's voice cut through the tension, cool and commanding. The agenda was the final ratification of the Mueller contract, the very deal Emma had fought to rescue in Berlin. But as the CFO presented the financial projections, Rebecca struck. With all due respect, she said smoothly, her gaze trained on Nathan, but her words aimed like knives at Emma. I have concerns about the transparency of this process. The room stilled. Rebecca continued, her voice honeyed but sharp beneath the surface. The speed at which this agreement was finalized raises questions, particularly since our newest executive, Ms. Warren, appears to have had unusual access to both international negotiations and— Her pause was calculated, her smile faint. Personal accommodations. Emma's chest tightened. Heat crawled up her neck. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Careful, Rebecca. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She flipped a folder open and slid a set of documents across the table. Preliminary reports suggest that clauses in this contract could expose us to unnecessary risk, perhaps overlooked in haste, or perhaps overlooked in deference. The implication landed heavy. Emma felt the weight of the stairs shift, probing, suspicious. She fought to breathe. She wanted to shout that she had studied every line, every clause, until her eyes blurred, that she had fought tooth and nail against Mueller's lawyers, that she had done nothing but serve the company with everything in her. But her voice, when it came, was barely steady. I reviewed those clauses myself, she said, forcing her chin up. They are standard safeguards in European cross-border transactions. The risk is minimal, and the long-term gain is substantial. Rebecca's smile deepened. How convenient that you were the one to review them. Alone. The word alone hung like poison in the air. A murmur rippled through the board. Doubt was a contagion, spreading quickly, infecting every glance, every rustle of paper. Emma's pulse thundered. For a moment she was 12 again, standing in the schoolyard as the other children mocked her second-hand shoes, her mother's accent, the bruises she couldn't explain. She had wanted to disappear then, to shrink so small no one could see. Her. The urge clawed at her now. But then she thought of Lily, of her daughter's laughter echoing in Nathan's garden, of the way she had looked at the new bed as if it were a castle. Emma could not shrink. Not now. She pushed back her chair and rose. The scrape of wood against tile was loud in the silence. If you're suggesting impropriety, she said, her voice trembling but growing steadier with each word, then say it plainly. Don't hide behind innuendo. I have worked harder than anyone in this room to salvage this deal. I have sacrificed nights, flights, time with my child, and I will not allow you to reduce my work to a rumor. Gasps broke across the table. Rebecca's smile faltered. Emma pressed forward, heart pounding. The clauses you call risky were deliberately preserved because removing them would have collapsed negotiations. I argued for them because I know what collapse feels like. Know what it means to lose everything. And I will never gamble with this company's future the way others gamble with people's lives. Her eyes locked with Rebecca's, unflinching. So if you're accusing me, accuse me of this. Of caring too much. Of refusing to let Brooks and Associates be swallowed by greed and short-sightedness. The silence was electric. Nathan leaned, back in his chair, his gaze unreadable, but Emma caught the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or recognition. The CFO cleared his throat, flipping through Rebecca's folder. She's right, he said reluctantly. The risk projections align with industry norms. The profit margins outweigh them. A wave of murmurs shifted again, this time away from doubt. Rebecca's lips tightened. She shot Emma a look of pure venom, but the damage was done. The room had turned. Nathan rose, smoothing his suit. Then it settled. The contract stands. Meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped back. Conversations ignited. But Emma remained frozen, her legs weak. As the others filed out, Rebecca lingered, leaning close as she passed. This isn't over, she whispered, her perfume sharp and cloying. You may have the child's sympathy and Nathan's protection, but I have the board's patience. And patience runs out. Emma's hands shook as she gathered her papers. But beneath the fear, a new fire sparked. She was tired of being cornered, tired of whispers. If Rebecca wanted a war, she had just declared one. When she stepped out into the corridor, Nathan was waiting. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, but the look in his eyes was enough. A silent acknowledgement of the storm they were in, and of the fact that for the first time, Emma wasn't fighting it alone. The rain had begun before dawn, and by the time Emma arrived at the glass tower of Brooks and Associates, the city outside had blurred into gray streaks against the skyline. She moved through the lobby with her shoulders squared, trying to steady herself, though every step felt like it might shatter the fragile calm she carried. She knew Rebecca wasn't finished. The whispered warning at the last board meeting still rang in her ears. This isn't over. The elevator doors slid open onto the top floor. As Emma stepped into the executive corridor, the silence was strange, charged. The usual hum of assistants, typing, the echo of phones ringing, gone. Instead, people moved quietly, eyes flicking toward her, then away. Her chest tightened. Something was wrong. The boardroom door was open. Inside, the directors were already seated, papers spread, their faces grim. Nathan sat at the head of the table, his jaw locked, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. Emma froze when she saw Rebecca. She was already standing, a stack of papers in her hands, her face glowing with the satisfaction of a predator who had cornered its prey. "Before we proceed," Rebecca said smoothly, her voice carrying the calm cruelty of someone who had rehearsed this moment, "there is a matter that must be addressed. A matter of integrity." Nathan's voice was iron. "Rebecca, we agreed this was not the time." She cut him off. "It is the only time. The company deserves the truth." Emma's pulse thundered. Her eyes darted to Nathan, then back to Rebecca. And in that instant, she knew Rebecca had found it. The secret she had buried, the one thread that could unravel everything. Rebecca lifted a page, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Our so-called rising star, Emma Warren, failed to disclose a matter of financial delinquency. Specifically, eviction notices, unpaid medical debts, and defaulted credit accounts. All of which she has carried with her into this company, unreported, unacknowledged, and ripe for exploitation by competitors." The words crashed into the room like stones through glass. Gasps rippled around the table. The CFO leaned forward, frowning. Another director muttered, "Unbelievable." Emma's throat closed. The walls seemed to tilt. She gripped the back of the nearest chair, trying to steady herself as heat burned in her cheeks. It wasn't just numbers on a page, it was her life. The months she'd skipped meals so Lily could eat, the nights she'd begged landlords for extensions, the bills she'd hidden under her mattress because opening them felt like inviting shame into her home. And now, here it was, displayed, in black ink, stripped of context, weaponized. Rebecca's smile was faint but sharp. How can we trust a woman who couldn't manage her own affairs to manage multi-million-dollar negotiations for this firm? How do we know she isn't vulnerable to bribery, to pressure, to failure? Emma felt the eyes of every director on her. For a moment she wanted to run, to grab her bag, race to the elevator, disappear, to shield Lily from this humiliation, to let the city swallow her whole. But Nathan spoke first. His voice was calm, low, dangerous. "Rebecca, that's enough." "No, Nathan," Rebecca replied, her tone suddenly edged with steel. "It is not enough. You may choose to ignore this, but the board cannot. We have standards, and she—" her gaze slashed toward Emma. "Does not meet them." Emma's hands trembled. Shame clawed up her throat. But then she remembered Lily's face. The night she had first slept in the Brooks mansion, her tiny voice whispering, "Mama, is this a dream?" She remembered her daughter's courage, answering the German call, standing tall when Emma herself had been ready to crumble. And something inside Emma snapped. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "Yes, it's true. I was evicted. I fell behind on bills. I drowned in debt because I had no choice but to choose between food and medicine, between my child's health and a roof over our heads. And if you think that makes me weak, then you don't understand strength at all." The room went utterly silent. Emma's eyes burned, but she didn't look away. "I didn't grow up with trust funds or networks to catch me when I fell. I clawed my way out of holes people in this room have never even seen. I worked nights, cleaned floors, took every job no one else wanted. And when all of that still wasn't enough, I faced humiliation, judgment, and fear. And I kept going." Her breath trembled, but her words grew stronger. "So yes, I carry scars, but they're not liabilities. They're the reason I will never betray this company. Because I know what betrayal feels like. Because I know what it means to have nothing, and I will not let that happen to us." A heavy silence stretched. Emma could see the conflict in the director's eyes, some hardened with doubt, others softened with something like respect. Nathan leaned forward, his voice cutting through like a blade. "Emma Warren has done more for this company in 6 months than some of you have in 6 years. She saved the Mueller deal when it was collapsing. She has proven time and again that her loyalty is to this firm, not to her past." His gaze locked on Rebecca. "And if we're questioning integrity, perhaps we should look closer at those who manipulate hardship to score points." Rebecca stiffened, her knuckles white against the paper she gripped. The CFO cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks is right. Personal history is not the same as professional performance, and Emma's results speak for themselves. A murmur of agreement followed. Not all. Some still looked wary, but enough. The tide had shifted, if only slightly. Rebecca's eyes burned with fury. She had thrown her sharpest spear and Emma was still standing, but in her gaze, Emma saw something darker. The promise that Rebecca would not stop until she destroyed her completely. The meeting dissolved slowly, the directors filing out with subdued voices. Emma remained, her body trembling, her hands cold. When the last person left, Nathan crossed to her, his expression taut. "You don't owe them an apology," he said softly. Her laugh was bitter, broken. "I don't owe them?" "Nathan, she just put my entire life on display. Every mistake, every failure, and you turned it into power." His eyes held hers, unwavering. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Emma shook her head, tears threatening. "It doesn't matter. She won't stop. She'll find something else." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Then we stop her first." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken resolve. Outside, the storm raged against the glass, lightning flashing across the skyline. Emma felt the weight of it pressing in, but also, strangely, a flicker of light within her. She had been exposed, humiliated, stripped bare before the people who judged her most, and she was still here. She wasn't sure if that made her stronger or just more dangerous. But she knew one thing. Rebecca had underestimated her, and that was a mistake Emma would make her regret. The day of the press conference arrived with a kind of weight Emma had never felt before. The city skyline glittered beyond the tall glass windows of the ballroom, where rows of chairs stretched out toward a sleek stage draped in banners of Brooks and Associates. Reporters were already crowding the aisles, their cameras flashing, their voices rising in anticipation. Emma stood at the edge of the room, her hands clasped tight in front of her, fighting to still the tremor in her fingers. She could feel the air thick with expectation, a low hum of electricity that pressed against her chest. She wasn't supposed to be here, at least not as the center of attention. This was Nathan's company, Nathan's event, Nathan's world. But after Rebecca's ambush in the boardroom, the whispers had grown louder. The public wanted answers, and Nathan had decided the only way to silence them was to bring everything into the open. He had told her the night before, his voice steady, but his eyes filled with something raw. "You won't face this alone." Now as she watched him step onto the stage, tall, composed, the cameras flashing against his sharp suit and grave expression, she felt a strange mix of dread and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan began, his voice carrying with the authority of a man used to commanding attention. "We are here today not to celebrate, but to confront. This company has been the subject of rumors, of whispers designed to fracture what we have built. It is time to put the truth before you." The crowd shifted, pens poised, lenses aimed, and then Rebecca appeared. She walked onto the stage with the confidence of a queen who believed the throne was already hers. Dressed in flawless ivory, her hair coiled in perfect waves, she radiated composure. But her eyes gleamed with the sharp light of someone ready to strike. "Truth," she said smoothly, taking her place at a second podium. "Yes, Nathan, let's speak of truth, shall we?" The ballroom hushed. Rebecca's voice rang out crisp and clear. "This company has allowed itself to be infiltrated by sentimentality, by weakness parading as strength. A woman with a history of debt, of failure, of disgrace, raised up as, though she were a paragon of virtue. Emma Warren is no symbol of resilience, she is a liability, and the world deserves to know it." Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. Nathan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Rebecca lifted a folder. "Here, documents, records, the very proof of her unworthiness. You may try to silence me, Nathan, but you cannot silence facts." She spread the papers like a dealer laying down cards. For a moment, the room tilted. Emma's face burned. This was worse than the boardroom. This was public, permanent, but then Nathan's voice cut through, calm, razor sharp. You want the truth, Rebecca? Then let's have it. Not the truth you twist and weaponize, the truth about you. A murmur surged through the room. Rebecca's smile faltered for the briefest second. What nonsense is this? She snapped. Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he gestured, and a man stepped forward from the wings, the company's head of compliance, holding a slim, sealed envelope. He handed it to Nathan, who slid a single sheet free and laid it on the podium. This, Nathan said, his voice resonant, is the truth Rebecca won't tell you. While she accuses others of vulnerability, she has been hiding her own. For months, our investigators traced irregular transfers, offshore accounts, and falsified invoices, all linked back to her office. Rebecca wasn't exposing weakness. She was exploiting it, lining her pockets while branding others unworthy. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the rapid-fire clatter of keyboards. Cameras clicked furiously as reporters shouted over one another. Rebecca's face went pale, then flushed red. Lies, she hissed, her voice cracking. Fabricated. Nathan's gaze didn't waver. The evidence is irrefutable, and it will be shared with the authorities. Emma watched as the paper slid from Rebecca's trembling hand, fluttering to the stage floor. For the first time, the immaculate mask cracked. The poise, the superiority, gone. In its place was raw, panicked fury. You think this will save her? Rebecca spat, her voice breaking into a shrill edge. She pointed a trembling finger at Emma. She's nothing. She's a waitress who stumbled into your world by accident. She will drag you down, Nathan. And when she does, Emma stepped forward. Her voice was steady, quiet, but unshakable. No, Rebecca, I didn't stumble into this world. I walked into it. Every scar, every failure, every mistake, I carried them here. And unlike you, I don't hide them. I don't twist them into weapons. I faced them. I survived them. And that is why you will never destroy me. The silence that followed was thunderous. Cameras captured her face, pale but resolute, her eyes blazing. In that moment, Emma was no longer the waitress in the corner cafe, or the trembling mother facing eviction notices in the dark. She was a woman who had walked through fire and come out carrying light. Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. Her words had abandoned her. Security approached quietly from the wings, and though she jerked back, sputtering, there was nothing left for her to cling to. The directors in the front row turned away from her, their eyes cold. The reporters swiveled back to Emma and Nathan, hungry for quotes, for images, for the story that had just been reborn. By the time Rebecca was let out, her empire of whispers had already collapsed. The conference continued in a blur, questions flying, Nathan answering with practiced calm. But every so often his gaze found Emma's, anchoring her in the storm. When it was over, when the lights dimmed and the room emptied, Emma stood alone at the edge of the stage. Her knees trembled, but her heart was steady. For the first time, in her life, she had not only survived humiliation, she had conquered it. Nathan appeared beside her, his hand brushing against hers. You realize what you did out there, don't you? Her laugh was soft, disbelieving. Barely held myself together? He shook his head. You showed them what strength really is. And you showed me, again, why none of this. He gestured at the banners, the cameras, the towering glass walls, means anything without you. Emma swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. Nathan. But he didn't let her finish. His hand closed around hers, firm. Sure. I don't care what Rebecca or anyone else says. I know who you are, and I'm done waiting for the right moment. Her breath caught as he dropped to one knee, right there on the stage, the city lights blazing through the glass behind him, the echo of the day's chaos still ringing in her ears. Reporters had left. The cameras were gone. And yet the moment felt larger than anything they had faced. Emma Warren, he said, his voice rough with something deeper than resolve. You walked into my life and changed it. You made me see beyond numbers and walls and power. You reminded me what it means to fight for something real, I don't want to build this empire without you. I don't want to live this life without you. Marry me. Emma's world tilted, her throat tightened, tears spilling freely now unashamed. The waitress, the mother, the woman who had stood in the shadows of the cafe corner. She had walked all the way to this stage, through storms and shame and fire. And she whispered, through the tears, the only word that mattered. Yes. Nathan rose, pulling her into his arms, the city beyond burning with light. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to believe that her story wasn't one of survival anymore. It was one of beginning. The poor little girl who had once answered a call in German to save her mother's dignity now stood as the woman who had silenced every doubt, every whisper, with truth. And though Rebecca's downfall would echo in tomorrow's headlines, the world's gaze had shifted. The story wasn't hers anymore, it was Emma's.